Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Father Joe Podcast. I'm Ken Calvert alongside Father Joe Grimaldi, and welcome once again back to our podcast. Just had my doctor's appointment. You know, I find now, here's what I do. Whenever I'm out and about, socializing or doing professional things, I'll ask somebody, say, Mark, you're a Catholic, right? And they go, oh, yeah. And I said, do I see you in church each and every week? Well, I try and go as often as I can. And so I ran across my doctor today, who went to Brother Rice High School. I went to Brother Rice.
Him,
yes.
You
were the principal at Brother Rice. You were a teacher at Brother Rice. And he goes to a church in our area called Our Lady of Sorrows. And I said to him, it's all going to fit together, folks, so trust your host on this one.
We always do.
It's come together a couple of times in the past week or so. I've asked my friends and other people about confession, going to confession. It's a little private. A lot of people look at me like, where are you going with this, Ken? I say, hey, when was the last time you were in confession? Or have you been to confession lately? And they kind of want to say, that's none of your business. None of your business. First of all, I just want to tell you that I said to Mark, my physician today, while going through this physical, I said, you know, there's no longer that sliding door in the confessional. And he said, well, there is at Our Lady of Sorrows. And I said, well, I thought they had done away with the sliding door. And you had suggested to me that when people go to confession now, and this is for people that may not have been to confession in quite some time, it's more of a one-on-one relationship with the priest, right?
Correct.
Okay. So walk me through how it works with you. Confessions are on a Saturday at 3 o'clock.
Correct.
And do you just walk into the church? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. It should be fairly obvious right now. I have not been to confession for a while.
All right. Since
does that bother you, by the way?
No.
Okay. I don't mean to laugh, but the first no is a little low. Okay.
Since 1970, I don't remember the exact date, confessionals that are built in churches have two options. One, there's a screen. Uh-huh. And so the person could sit on the other side of the screen, and the priest is on one side of the seat. If the person wants to go face to face, there's a chair to the left of the priest. So what happens is, if the priest wants to use the screen, or if he has to use the screen because that's where the penitent is, uh-huh. Well, the priest puts his ear to that and he can hear. Otherwise, many people today, go face to face. They would rather, particularly if they're facing serious problems, it's easier to discuss those problems face to face than it is, bless me, Father, for absent. I've done this 3/4 times. Then I did. Well, that was 33 times I said that word, and then God help us. I said, cool it, okay, cool it. I said, you can't go on like that, yeah. Okay. So anyway, you're trying to get people down to reality so that they confess sins, not that they have said the word gosh, whatever.
So you're saying, in other words, in taking the Lord's name in vain.
Correct. That's okay. What they're saying. Uh-huh. But when you speak face-to-face to people, they're able to be more relaxed. In the beginning, if they've never done it before, it's a little bit of tension. Uh-huh. But once they begin, it's so much more a pleasant situation. It's a great conversation, a good interaction between the priest and the individual. It almost makes them feel a lot more comfortable than being rigid behind this screen and so on. The other thing, too, I find, if you're a priest that's active in the church, it doesn't matter if they're screen or not. You recognize the voice of the people. So yeah. You say, oh, is that right, Ann?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Uh-huh. Well, I was going to say that, like a lot of people, the anonymity tends to make it easier for them to confess their sins. And if that's the case, Father Joe, maybe that's good.
Well, I think so too. Mm-hmm. But I always got a big kick out of, did you ever see the movie Moonstruck?
Yes.
Well, she goes to confession after she slept with her brother-in-law-to-be. Mm-hmm. So she says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I ate meat on Friday once. I slept with my brother. And then I stepped on somebody's toe on the way out. And then Father says, what was that middle one, please?" I got the biggest laugh.
Yeah. But I think, we talked about this once before, too. There was, especially as a kid, there was such a great sense of relief coming out of the confessional, and now, naturally, that continues today. You, at one point, suggested to me that some people don't need confession, but they just go because they think they need to go to confession.
They become scrupulous, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. That happens to a number of people. But, however, there's a misunderstanding on sex. That's a big, how shall I put it? People don't understand sex. They don't understand when it's legitimate and when it isn't.
Oh, okay.
And so anything at all, even with the spelling of it, my God, it brings terror into the hearts of most people. So they can't bring themselves to confess. But then once they get over that, and you can reason with them, and you could let them understand that, for example, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I cheated. I cheated on my wife once. I'm sorry about that. Now, what is the sin there? Well, it's the
fidelity,
sex.
isn't it?
Yes, but that's the important thing, okay? Uh-huh. But what they'll say is because I had sex with somebody else. Well, look, when you make a commitment for life to a person, that's a real commitment, and you have to hold to it. So it's the sin going against fidelity, basically. That's where it is. But I think erroneously, many people think, it's just the sex part, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's where I've sinned. Well, you're breaking your vows.
Absolutely.
And so this is something that's very serious. So what I'm trying to say is that very often, if people would speak face to face, then they can bring some of these nuances out so that people can discuss them more freely and understand it better.
I think sometimes body language might help that. Give that a thought for a second. In other words, you and I are sitting face to face.
Correct.
Somebody, I'm recreating the story you just said,
sure.
Or the hypothetical. That being, how did you word it? I don't remember exactly how you said it, but the person involved said, I had sex with another woman, or I cheated.
Yes,
I think you said
cheated.
I cheated.
They don't say they hate to use the word sex. That's kind of interesting.
Really.
When you
non-scientific research, I understand that,
so
and we don't want to.
I cheated on my wife.
But the implication is that you had sex with another woman.
Correct.
And you broke the vow of marriage, basically.
But they forget about the vow.
And they think about the sex.
The only thing they think about is the sex. Mm-hmm. So there's more to it than sex.
Don't you think then by coming outside of the booth, the anonymity room, if you will, sitting side by side, the body language then kind of takes over, and that will help you adjust how you talk to that person when you say, no, it's not about the sex, it's about the vow, it's about the fidelity, at which point the person might then start to relax, shoulders come down, and you go, I know, but...
I think you're ready for ordination.
Oh, really?
No, seriously, I'm thinking, that's...
Did you hear the angels, folks?
I did. They're coming from everywhere. But that's exactly what it is, basically. Face to face, there's body language, which is sometimes louder than words. And I think if you can give comfort to the individual by how you look, by the smile you bring across, by the look of understanding that you have for what the individual is going through, and even if you have to stop that person and say, okay, let's take a deep breath. We're okay. We're okay. Nobody's going to rebel here. This type of thing. So you're very right. I mean, the body language is a great help when you're going face-to-face to confession. And you don't see that behind a screen. All you hear is a voice. And very often, they realize they speak too softly. Mm-hmm. And not because I'm deaf, which I am, but that's why I always get the big lines at confession, because they know he can't hear me. So
no, you're the good priest. Yeah. Who's the easy guy? Found the Grimaldi. Go to see Grimaldi.
He can't hear a thing.
Yeah.
No, but I think if one of the things when they're so nervous behind a screen, they tend to whisper. Uh-huh. And because they don't want you to hear what was really happening, and you have to kind of calm them down. Okay, what is it that you said?
Wow, you just woke everybody up on this podcast, including your host. Now, here's something I was thinking about while you were talking. A lot of people, maybe they can transition from being in the confessional with the screen and then eventually work their way out of that situation. Let's say you kind of know who the person is, but eventually they go, I've become much more comfortable now with this priest that I think I'm going to do a side by each and talk that way. So, I mean, there's no right way, there's no wrong way, but that's it. The right thing to do is if you think you need to go to confession, go to confession.
Now, the structure of the confessional nowadays is not, it's a room, mm-hmm. and with a crucifix, with a candle maybe, and then side by side, there is a screen with a kneeler and a chair to the left. So one of the things you could do that might help that transition, and do it very gently, would it be okay if you sat at the chair? Because they can see the chair.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
See, it's within the vision of the penitent. Uh-huh. So you say, if you just sit on the chair, we could go face to face, you know, this type of thing. And believe it or not, many people do that. Maybe they needed that, how should I put it, the urging for them to do it, and they'll do it. At the beginning, they're going to be shy, but once they sit down and start talking, then you could get to the root of the problem, you know. I think so many have this ingrained in their heads, a grocery list. And so I've done this 15 times, I've done this 4 times.
Well, that's because we learned that in grade school.
And I'm not blaming them, but that's what it is.
Right.
But I said, you know, all right, are we talking about lust? Is that what the problem is? Is it lust?
Yeah.
Yes, Father, that's what it is. I mean, but to start enumerating 20 times of this, 20 times of that, and so on. Another thing I think we have to be careful about is, we've discussed it before, the difference between mortal and venial sins, mm-hmm. terms that are no longer used, serious sin and not so serious sin. You know, it's the idea that for years people thought they were going to go to hell because they were eating meat on Friday.
Right.
Well, what's happened? All of a sudden, that's become a venial sin.
Right.
I mean, you know, no.
Wait, I'm going to correct you there. Yeah. Last time I checked, it is okay now to eat meat on Friday.
Of course. So. The good thing that happens with an interchange face-to-face is you can discuss the root of what the problem is, as opposed to, 15 times saying GD. You know what I mean?
You know, last week I was telling you about a friend of mine who will admit to this, that he cannot look people in the eye. I think one of the reasons why some people may want to go behind the screen is they have a difficult time, especially when it's a difficult time for them to look you, the priest, in the eye.
Sure.
To have to confess that they kind of stepped out of line here. This is going to be a tough thing for me to have to tell you, Father. Now, a lot of these people also sort of assume that you're more or less a member of the police force of God. Do you know what I mean? In other words, like, no, that's not exactly what I was trying to say.
Once again, you're ready for ordination.
Oh, is that it?
Yes.
Well, I think that...
Because, you're right on. You're right on in what you're saying. See, one of the things what the people have in mind is that the priest is on a pedestal.
Yes.
He can do no wrong.
And you're kind of wearing a badge.
And you wear it, yes. And so what happens is, how should I put it? They're scared to death of you and so on and so forth. But once they begin to realize that you mess up just like anybody else, maybe they would find it easier to talk to that individual rather than be afraid of the priest who is all perfect. Well, he's not all perfect. He's human. He's going to have the same inclinations that anybody else has. And so knowing that he's in that state, you can be more, how should I put it, much more at ease, and you can discuss whatever it is that's really bothering your advancement in spirituality. That's what it's all about.
I have a final question for you, because, bless me, Father, but we are running out of time. Some people have something that's way, way, way in their past, and they've been waiting a very long time to bring it forward in the form of a confession. I'm not talking about being on, unfortunately, the deathbed situation. I'm talking about prior to that, where it's just been troubling them. What advice do you have for that person that may be sitting on something that they really want to confess, but they're just flat out afraid to do it? Do you have some advice?
Since each one of us is so different, I mean, you would attack that problem according to what the needs of the individual are. So, for example, I just think if when you're speaking to someone face-to-face and they really hesitate to discuss a certain topic, you might try to make them feel even more at ease so that they can discuss it more. If you can guess what it is, maybe you should throw out some hints so that they would, again, understand that you know what it is, and therefore they wouldn't be afraid to say something. Because when you come down to it, sometimes some people are so sensitive that it may be something that's not so horrible.
Right.
But it's held them away from God for
20 years.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be, you know, if they could just speak out. It's okay, you know, this type of thing. But again, I think because everybody's so different, you have to attack it according to the individual's needs.
Yeah, because you don't ever want to say to somebody, is there something else really bothering you? Where you're implying that there is something else really bothering that person, and there isn't.
Again, that takes the priests has to be astute in trying to figure out if there is something. And if there is something, you know, I think you would like to talk about something else. Can we talk about it? Again, it depends on how you say it. It depends on what you say. You can't be presumptuous. That's why I agree with you. You can't be presumptuous, but by the same token, all they need to hear is the right word, and they would, you know, open up.
In other words, you can go, look at Calvert, you're not fooling anybody. Give it up right now. You give it up or you're not leaving this church.
And we're all human.
Yeah. You know, we have to remind ourselves of that a lot. Now, allow me to say this, and don't interrupt me, okay? Please, excuse me for being harsh here. But bless me, Father, for our time is up, and we have to move along now. We have other topics that we need to discuss, and I look forward to moving on to the next topic, which I'm not going to share with you right now. I'm going to make you wait. That'll be your compelling tease. I have a great idea for our next podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to come back next week for another edition of the Father Joe Podcast. I'm Ken Calvert, along with Father Joe, and I'd like to thank you so much.
I can't wait to see what that is.
Well, you're just going to have to wait. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you have a question or a comment for the Father Joe Podcast, send it to fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. Follow Father Joe on Twitter @FatherJoePodcast. The Twitter address again is @FatherJoePodcast. Please subscribe to the Father Joe Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and soon on iHeartRadio. We also ask that you rate the podcast and feel free to leave a comment. And finally, if you have a friend that you think might enjoy the podcast, please pass it along. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and see you next time.